Hey friends, you're watching Kelvin's Faith Unfiltered. Today we find ourselves listening in on a conversation between two individuals discussing one of the oldest and most emotional challenges to the Christian faith, the problem of evil. This is part of our series on the 5 most common arguments against the existence of the God of the Bible. Let's see what happens when this common objection meets a presuppositional response. Meet Steve the skeptic, a thoughtful guy who's wrestled with this issue for a long time. And across from him sits Paul the presuppositionalist, a calm voice who believes Christianity not only has answers but makes the very question of evil possible. Let's listen in.
Hey Steve, you know why I don't trust stairs?
Why?
Because they're always up to something. Anyhow, have you given any more thought to the conversation we had last week?
The one about the existence of God? Yeah, I have. In fact, I think I have some pretty strong rebuttals if you want to talk about them. You see, I think my inability to accept the existence of the God of the Bible comes down to 5 things. The first, and maybe the biggest, is the problem of evil.
Yeah, that's a big one. Before we go too far, tell me what you mean by problem of evil.
To me, it's simple. If God is real, if he's all good and all powerful, then why is the world so full of suffering and injustice? Children die of cancer, wars wipe out innocent people, disasters kill thousands. If God could stop evil but doesn't, he's cruel. If he can't, he's weak. Either way, the God of the Bible doesn't fit.
Okay, that's clear. So you're saying evil's existence either disproves God or makes him unworthy of worship.
Exactly. A God who's good and powerful shouldn't allow what we see in the world.
Got it. One more question. When you call something evil, what do you mean? Are you saying it's just something you dislike, or that it's truly objectively wrong?
No, I mean really wrong. Not just my opinion, wrong. Period.
Okay, that's an important place to start. Let's talk about that. Steve, can I ask you something specific? You'd agree that Hitler's hatred and genocide of the Jews was evil. Truly evil in any era of time and in any culture, right?
Of course, that's as evil as it gets.
And what about something closer to home? Say the abuse of a child. Even if a society accepted it, you'd still call it wrong. Correct?
Absolutely. Some things are just wrong.
I would agree. But here's the question. Why? Why is it evil? Who determines it to be evil? Because if morality is only a construction of society, then societies can change it. And if that's true, what Hitler did wasn't objectively wrong, just unpopular. Do you see the problem?
I guess you could say morality comes from what we agree on as a culture then. Maybe it isn't some universal law out there.
But if that's true, then morality is just opinion. It can shift, and it might even be possible that Hitler was right, at least in your worldview. Yet you and I both know he was wrong. Morally wrong. Not just unpopular. Which tells me you're appealing to a moral standard that's bigger than culture. Bigger than you and bigger than me. And that standard doesn't come from society. It comes from a moral lawgiver. God. You see, you're using his standard to argue against him.
I see your point about Hitler, but maybe morality doesn't have to be absolute to work. Maybe it's about what benefits the most people. You know, kind of like what's pragmatic. If a moral code helps society function, that's good enough.
That's an interesting thought. What you're describing sounds a lot like pragmatism, though. The idea that something is right because it works. But let me ask you, works for who? What if what works best for one group harms another? And does something stop being evil just because it works in the short term? Under pragmatism, even oppression can be justified if it stabilizes a society. That doesn't sit right with me. I don't imagine it sits right with you either.
Okay, maybe it's more about what helps the majority, the greatest good for the greatest number. Yeah, that feels stronger.
That's utilitarianism, and it has the same problem. The majority can trample the minority. Under that logic, if most people agree to enslave a few, it's morally fine. Yet we both know slavery is evil, regardless of how many people benefit from it. That tells me you already believe in a standard higher than public opinion.
Well, maybe morality is just relative to each culture. Different societies have different rules, and that's fine as long as people agree.
Yep, that's relativism, and it collapses on itself. If morality is only what a culture says it is, then we can't condemn any culture, ever. You couldn't call ancient slavery or child sacrifice evil, because those cultures accepted them. But deep down, you and I both know, some things are always wrong. That's why relativism fails. Look, I'm not saying this closes the discussion, but I think we both agree a worldview has to account for its claims. Christianity is the one worldview that allows me to account for the morality I actually believe in. Inside this framework, we can debate what's moral and immoral. Outside of it, we have no grounding for morality at all.
I hear you, but it still feels like you're just plugging God in where you can't explain something. It feels like a God of the gaps. When you don't have an answer, you just say, God did it.
I understand why it sounds that way, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm not appealing to God because I lack answers. I'm appealing to him because without God, nothing makes sense in the first place. The God of the Bible does the best job of making sense of things like morality, logic, and even science.
How so?
Think about it. You and I both believe in history. We trust that the past teaches us something about the future. But why should a random universe work in a predictable way? Christianity says it's because God created laws that govern the universe so we can study and rely on them. Or take logic. You use reason to argue with me. But how do abstract, unchanging laws of logic exist in a purely material, ever-changing world? Christianity says they reflect the consistency of God's character. Without him, logic is just a human invention, and it has no binding force. And morality, like we said, flows from God's character. That's why it's always constant. Without God, morality shifts with opinion and evil loses its meaning. Without God as the foundation, how do you account for anything holding together? Logic, morality, even the order of the universe. You see, that's a much bigger problem in my mind than the problem of evil. At least in a worldview with a moral God, we can debate morality. Without him, we have no basis for it at all.
Yeah, that's a hard question.
It is, and I think the evidence of God is everywhere. Whether we acknowledge it, well, that's another story.
Even if I accept that morality points to God, there's still something that bothers me. The God of the Bible himself seems to commit evil. He floods the world, wipes out nations, even commands genocide. Doesn't he do the very thing he tells us not to do?
That's a fair question, and it's where a lot of people stumble. God's actions are often judged through our limited human perspectives. We see events like Noah's Ark or the judgment of Canaan and call them cruel. But we forget God is not a man. His ways are above our ways. He acts according to his nature, holy, just, and loving. He cannot do evil because he cannot contradict himself. What he does is always right, even when we struggle to understand it or see the angle to which he is working. And we always forget how people in those ancient times understood these events. The flood, for example. The flood in the Bible wasn't seen as an act of cruelty. It was an act of judgment, but it was also an act of grace and covenant. Unlike the ancient flood myths where gods are selfish and uncaring, the God of the Bible is grieved by human evil and provides a way forward through Noah.
If you want to dig deeper into how the flood fits into ancient stories and why it's not the act of a cruel God, check out my blog at kelvinsfaithunfiltered.com. Look for Is Genesis Literal? Blog for The Flood in the Frame. Also, if you like this content, please like, share, and leave a comment. It really helps us out. Now, back to our show.
So when we judge God's actions, we need to remember his justice and his love are never at odds. They work together perfectly, even when our human eyes can't see the full picture.
But Paul, even if you say God's nature is good, it still looks like he breaks his own rules, like he's inconsistent. He commands people not to kill, then wipes out whole nations himself. From my view, that's inconsistent, even immoral.
I get why you'd see it that way. It's a tough question, and Christians shouldn't rush past it. Here's the thing, though. When God commands us not to murder, he's talking to humans. Creatures with limited authority, limited knowledge, and sinful motives. God's actions are different because he is the creator, the judge of all the earth. He has the right to give life and to take it away, and unlike us, he always does so for perfectly just reasons.
That sounds like special pleading. You're saying God plays by a different rule book than we do.
You see, God's actions are just because they flow from who he is, and he is holy and perfect and the judge of all things. Think about it. Justice itself flows from his nature. If there's an ultimate judge, he's not bound by a law above himself. He is the lawgiver. If he were to act against his own nature, that would be evil. But scripture shows he never does that. Take the judgment of the Canaanites. We tend to read that through modern eyes and see only cruelty. But the Bible's own account shows centuries of patience. God withheld judgment for over 400 years while their violence and idolatry grew unchecked. This wasn't random slaughter, it was judgment against a society consumed by evil. And even in that, God's purpose was redemptive. Rahab, a Canaanite, was spared and became part of the lineage of Christ. Or Noah's Ark. Modern readers imagine God raging, but the text says God was grieved. The flood was judgment, yes, but also renewal. He saved Noah, made covenant, and gave the world a fresh start. In the ancient world, other flood stories describe gods who kill out of annoyance and selfishness. They only regret these acts when they realize there's no one left to give sacrifices to them. The God of the Bible stands apart. His judgment is tied to his holiness and his love.
What about the cross? To me, it looks like divine abuse. God pours out wrath on his own son. Isn't that cruel?
I've heard that objection, cosmic child abuse. But it misunderstands what happened. Jesus wasn't a helpless victim. He said, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down on my own accord." The cross wasn't God abusing Jesus. It was God the Son willingly taking on the penalty we deserved. It was justice and mercy meeting in one act. The judge himself bore the judgment. Steve, I'm not saying these events are easy to understand. They're not. But when you look at them in context, when we see who God is, what his nature is, and how the Bible's own authors understand these acts, we realize that they show a consistent God. They show a God who is balanced, who is perfectly just, perfectly loving, and perfectly wise. A God who, without him, we can't reason or rationalize at all. He is the presupposition to which all of our thinking is grounded upon, even if we don't give him the credit for it. We often judge God's actions through our limited creaturely point of view. But if God is who he says he is, his justice and his love aren't at odds. They're perfectly balanced in everything he does. And that balance reaches its clearest expression at the cross.
So evil exists. We both agree. But instead of disproving God, you're saying it actually points to him? I have to admit, that's not how I thought about it before. You're arguing that the very fact I call something evil means I already assume there's a standard bigger than me.
Exactly. Evil is real and it's horrible. But it's not ultimate. God doesn't ignore it. He deals with it. Only with the God of the Bible can we find purpose in pain. Only with the God of the Bible can we know that everything will one day be made right. The cross shows that evil isn't the final word, and the resurrection promises that every injustice will be set right. That's something that makes this universe make sense.
I gotta think about this.
That's all I ask, Steve. Think it through. Hey, let's go get something to eat.
And just like that, the conversation ends. No fireworks, no instant conversions, just an honest exchange between two worldviews. Steve raised a powerful objection. If evil exists, can a good and powerful God exist? But we saw how Paul's presuppositional approach reframed the question. Rather than evil disproving God, it became a signpost pointing to him. Morality, logic, even the order of the universe all find their grounding, not in chance, but in the character of God. This doesn't mean the discussion is over. Next time we see Steve push back with another common challenge. If God is real, where's the evidence? We'll listen in as Paul responds to the claim that there's no proof for the God of the Bible. Until then, thanks for listening to Kelvin's Faith Unfiltered. If you found this helpful, share it, subscribe, leave a comment, and until next time, stay shaped by reason and guided by faith. And oh yeah, take it easy.